Good evening, all of you. At the COP26 summit, India set a net zero carbon emissions target by 2070. While solar energy is expected to be the keystone of this transition, wind energy will play a critical role in meeting India's growing demand and achieving this target. The country presently has the fourth highest wind installed capacity in the world and is expected to add 50 to 60 gigawatt of wind capacity by 2030, bringing the total capacity to 90 to 100 gigawatts. But however, there's still a long way to go. To discuss on the opportunities, we have an eminent panel with us today. We have Mr. Girish, Tanti, Vice Chairman of Suzlon Energy, Mr. Ajay, Shankar, Distinguished Fellow, TERI, Mr. A. Nithyanand, he's the CEO, Renewable Business India, Sembcorp Industries, Mr. Bala, Vengat, Kutti, he's a promoter of Indowind Energy, and we have Mr. Sambitosh, Mohapatra, partner leader, ESG, Climate and Energy, PwC India. Maybe we can start off with Mr. Girish Tanti, who, like Analesh said, represents one of the pioneers of the wind energy segment in this country. We have got very ambitious targets of net carbon emissions net zero by 2070. And wind energy has a very, very important role to play in this. However, we have not yet achieved our full potential. So maybe we could take some opening remarks from you as to what are the potentials, what are the opportunities that we have, and the reasons why we are still not acted up to our full potential.
Thank you, Arun. So I think wind energy is one area where our country has started this journey over 30 years now. So we were amongst the first in the world, the first group of countries which took on wind energy. And I think it's been a long way since we have come from that point in time. And, the kind of technology development that has happened over the past 3 decades has made sure that, just to give you an example, I mean, today, if you see the total potential of wind energy today in our country, it's in excess of 1 terawatt, yeah? So it's very huge, the amount of wind potential we have. This, if you were to talk just 2-3 decades back, then it was less than half. Now, it's not that the wind resources have changed, but the technologies have changed, which has made it possible to almost double the capacity. So I think there is, unlike some of the other renewables in case of wind, it's a very complex science, it's a very complicated product. And there is a need for continuous innovation to be able to bring down the LCOE over the years. Even if you see the cost of generation, I think over this period we've almost brought it down from 6-7 rupees to at 3 rupees today. So that is also kind of reduced significantly from there. And I think what we need to also compare is that compared to the world, how are we doing? Because just comparing wind and solar locally would not make sense. So I think from that point of view, if we see, we still remain reasonably amongst the top 5 players in the world as far as wind energy is concerned. So I think that way the potential is there, the technology is there, and the challenges that we have had historically is that we have not had very stable policy environment. And wind energy by itself being a high capital intensive innovative product, you need that long-term view. Unlike solar, which is more of a commodity, you don't need long-term view. You could get into manufacturing and putting it together. So I think that is one reason why it has not taken off the way it could have taken off. Lately, I think having this policy framework which we have now, the target which is there of achieving 140 gigawatts by 2030, if we look at what are the building blocks to achieving that target, first of all, if you look, it's from a product point of view, that do we have the technology and the product to make it happen? It takes off, yes. We have that. Today the technologies we have in the country are world class, so they can compete any technology in the world. So that's not an issue. The second is then the manufacturing and supply chain. So unlike solar, the good news for wind is that it is indigenous. We are able to manufacture the value chain of solar wind in India itself. So although we have had this huge boom for solar energy, unfortunately large portion of that is all imported. So really you are not able to build up a local economy out of it, but you are building a capacity. So it serves one purpose but not the other. Whereas in wind, with the value chain which is developed, today I think that is an added benefit that SMEs are being developed, the ecosystem is developed, and a new area of focus which has come for wind energy, for even at the component level, is that now India is becoming the China +1 strategy for all global sourcing. So a good amount of export has started at component level also. So the SMEs and MSMEs are benefiting from that growth. So that's the other huge opportunity, not just India, but the global market. People are looking at India for sourcing from that point of view. I think the challenge where we are facing largely on the growth of the industry is largely to do around, number one, which is coming, is around the electrical infrastructure, the grid infrastructure. Unlike in case of solar, in wind, for a country like ours, there are specific areas where you have good winds, where the viability is there. Solar, largely, you can put up at most of the locations. So the grid infrastructure needs to get built up where you have the wind potential. And I think that's some catching up to be done in that space, due to which you are not able to move fast. And then, of course, there is the whole local development. In the earlier sessions, as we discussed, end of the day, this is all state subject. Although you have federal policy, but the implementation is at a state level. Different states have different land use mechanisms and other things. So I think those are getting cleared up. So I think as long as and now most of the states are also charting out their own renewable energy journey. We heard how Gujarat is also doing it, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, all of them. So I think as the states are taking on their own renewable energy journey, now the speed will come.
Mr. Tanti, if I can continue with you, great Tulsi Tanti once told me that, because of our roads, many of the, blades and turbines, they can't move through at, 10 years, 15 years back. That situation has changed now. We have wider roads now. You can transport the blades from your factories to the locations. Does that scenario changed the wind's prospects in India, or do you think that that was still a minor roadblock? The issues are much deeper, logistic-wise and other things-wise. Transmission is a big issue right now. ROWs are very difficult to get. Do you think those type of things are holding Indian growth story, despite the fact we are coming out of some bottlenecks or the other?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very valid question. I think, again, purely with the size and scale, the turbines are going large. Logistics becomes a very important element. And, when you look at a country like ours, which is, of course, building up the infrastructure pretty fast, but still, largely the installations of such products happen at the fag end of the economy, And it takes a while for the infrastructure to reach at that stage. So when we do our master planning, we have to factor that into our design also, that which are the areas which are ready for allowing such developments to happen. And so we kind of stagger it in a manner that our project planning is synchronized to the infrastructure development in those regions. So in a way, it's an art which you learn through time, how to strike a balance between your product development cycle and the implementation cycle. So today, if you were to say me that as Suzlon, can you kind of build, say, a 10 megawatt turbine? I can do it. I know I have the ability to do it. But can you stick it in India? No. So, so it's not ready as a country for something like that. So I think you have to kind of synchronize that. At the same time, there are other elements. Infrastructure is one element. The other element is the manufacturing ecosystem. So for going larger turbines, larger components, you need the manufacturing capacity, gearboxes, generators, all those scales change. And it's logarithmic in terms of complication as the size goes.
Yeah.
So even that ecosystem has to develop. Otherwise, you will end up continuously depending on imports.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas Suzlon philosophy has been, we will produce it with at least 80% local content. So with that mindset, we kind of develop the whole ecosystem along with the product development.
Yeah, I think, perhaps we can bring in the other speakers here. We have Mr. Ajay Shankar, to whom I would like to ask the fact that, has the wind energy segment lost out when it comes to the solar, the solar segment, because solar seems to have, really done well. And some of the previous speakers in the other sessions were also talking about it. The levelized cost of energy for solar has declined, much more, around 11% per year compared to 5% for wind, which is also cited as one of the ways, reasons why customers have moved towards solar. How do you view this, and what is holding back, and why this mismatch when you compare it with the solar offerings?
The first thing to bear in mind is that when you make a cost comparison, wind has an advantage which is not factored in, because when you're wanting to meet electricity demand, you need electricity after the sun sets, and for that you need storage. Now, wind needs less storage than solar. So the price differential needs that kind of adjustment. But the prices of both wind and solar are considerably lower than new thermal. And the price of renewable energy with storage is also lower than new thermal. So on purely commercial considerations, India now needs new renewable plus storage and no new thermal. And that needs a rapid scaling up of deployment of both renewable energy and storage. And I think given the fact that we have decided to achieve net zero by 2070, and to get to net zero by 2070, we also need to produce a lot of green hydrogen. I think we need to just think big and think of developing the entire of land mass-based wind potential as well as solar potential. And we should think beyond 2030 of how we become the leading power in the world in terms of transiting away from fossil fuels. And we have the potential to do that in a cost-effective manner. So I think we need to think big and not get into this thing of whether wind is slightly expensive or solar is slightly expensive. We need to go full steam on both. Both are cheaper than thermal. So that's the key point.
And just to add a little bit to what Sai is saying, I think if you see the 500 gigawatts target which is set, this is built up from the least cost option. The mix which is designed by CEA is that from the least cost option, what should be how much. And in that, you have a role for solar to play, a role for wind. I think the kind of development that today is happening, both are likely to hit their targets and beat them. So I don't think it's a one versus the other, and I don't think any customer is thinking like that. And anybody who is aware of the load side of things knows it, that when you do the rightful from a consumer point of view, then they both stand a tough competition. So as Sir said, when you need the power the most and when the power prices are the highest, you don't get solar, but you will get wind. So it's also the price what consumer is willing to pay at that point in time. So you have to factor in all those aspects. And I think neither one can solve the issue. And the beautiful part of our country is that when you put the solar curve, wind curve on top of each other, and you add in, plug in amount of battery, it just beautifully sets in such a way that it can compete today's thermal energy easily. And even if you, and this is without considering the cost of carbon. The moment you put the cost of carbon, it is even significantly cheaper than any conventional energy today that we can make in India.
So from Mr. Tanti to let's go to Sembcorp, one of the largest player in Asia. Nitya, I want to understand from you, when your board sees India as an opportunity vis-a-vis other countries in Asia. One, of course, is the potential which India has not only to consume but also to generate wind-based energy. How do you analyze the regulatory and the policy framework? Do you think more hard work needs to be done to ease it out? How is the thought process in your corporation?
Thank you. Thanks, Anilesh. I think we all know our Honorable Prime Minister was in Singapore yesterday. And during that conversation, he met a lot of people across Singapore, amongst them our group CEO, Wong Kim Yen. And they met and aligned, and our CEO clearly stated, and I echo those words and I'll state them again, that India is by far the most friendly renewable country in the world. If you want today to build a power project, renewable power project in the US, the first date you will get to connect it to the grid is more than 8 years ago. 8 years you have to wait. If you try to do it in other countries, it could be even worse. Of course, China is a different, to a large extent, a different kettle. And they have their other issues. But in that sense, the plethora of regulation that has come into India to support the renewable energy sector is staggering. I think everyone agrees. The GNA regulations, transmission waiver, LPS rules, flowing back of cash to all the developers in India. There are the green open access rules. It's just come at a pace that is quite, I don't think any other sector has that kind of regulatory intervention and support that we have. So no complaints. But at the same time, I just want to point out a question we need to ask: are all aspects of government working towards this? Or is it only MNRE and MOP? For example, I want to give a small, as of earlier, maybe last year, all bank guarantees, corporate guarantees for loans taken in India, when given to a subsidiary, now have a notional cost of 1%, and 18% of that notional cost has to be given to as GST. Now, industries which have pass-through credit in GST won't care. It'll go through. It's just a pass-through. But power sector does not have that. So all international companies that are borrowing money in India with bank guarantees and corporate guarantees and facilitating loans in India suddenly see there's a new angle to it, cost. Now, it's not intentional, I'm sure. It was possibly not thought that the sector that will get worst hit by this will be the power sector, but it is hitting the power sector. And amongst the largest players in the power sector are concerned about. So I think to some extent, a holistic perspective towards regulation that goes beyond the two sectors can be looked at. And we need to look at it in that sense. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I want to bring in Mr. Bala Kutti and to know from him as an entrepreneur, as to some of your experiences, in the segment, and also the fact, we keep talking about adoption of new technologies, be it in storage or otherwise. So if you could throw some light on, some of this and the policy regulations surrounding this, is there something that you feel could be done better to encourage more entrepreneurs?
Yeah, good evening to all. Thank you for bringing us here. Yes, we as an entrepreneur, we started this Indowind Energy about 27 years back. Being the first company we thought we should position as an independently viable IPP, a renewable energy company, was totally dependent on various benefits like tax benefits, so many other things were given for promoting it at that point of time. So it was a challenge, to make a IPP on its own in a time where it was totally viable with other factors. We thought it's a long-term prospects and chose maybe some of the sites like best windy sites in India. So we could be successful to a great extent because of the beginning. Of course, the scaling up was a problem. Like it could be a small company, it could be viable without, in a regime where the cost of power was very less at the time, and it was all promoted by the government subsidies. But today, if you look at it, the wind industry has become kind of viable on its own with the lowest power cost, whatever it can offer. And as you rightly said, there are some problems like new technologies coming in. They have improved the efficiency for the wind turbine. We have solar, and we are also looking at the pricing issues, what Mr. Tanti brought out. There are different time zones now, peak time, non-peak times, etc. So energy storage has to be there in the ecosystem as a combo for it to be more viable and more kind of, to be a aggressive growth. So as the whole, we have a grid issues were there. We had various other challenges. Now today, solar is very easy probably to install. We can do a small capacities. But when you think about a wind today, people are talking about 4 or 5 megawatts, and we have moved ahead. To a great extent, country's infrastructure, road growth, everything is supporting. But still, capital intensive is there. We still have a long financing issues. As Mr. Nithyanand really pointed out, there is a big challenge of GST. We were all along were supported baby, like for the last 27 years. In the last 3-4 years, suddenly I see there is an 18% GST on the energy power as an ultimate company. I cannot pass it on to anybody, to my customers. So where this kind of a costing of 18% is going to, how can I absorb a small company as an entrepreneur? This is one of the biggest challenge we have been representing to the government. It has to be made. Maybe, okay, we cannot, the political angle, it may not be for the common man or a residential time, yes, you may not load them. But as a consumers, like my corporate customer, today we are talking the country is ready for slowly from a government sales, we have moved to a group captive schemes, we have moved to a third-party sales now. So the market is opening up. Then as Indian Energy Exchange now, we have seen models in Europe and in other countries, there is a free trade of power is encouraged. Now in the earlier session, we heard that they even want to connect all the grids, not only within the country, India, also with the neighboring countries like UAE. So where are we leading to? These kind of challenges or innovations or new technologies and software, technology like robotics, they all come into play. A much, much bigger game I could see. In fact, some of the papers in NASA say, why not we even install some solar kind of panels and reflect light to the earth to save about 2 hours of our peak demand time, like 6 to 8. Why don't you have some technologies there? So we have a long way ahead as whatever you talked about technology innovations. But within this, I feel there is definitely whatever the country has put a target, it's achievable with players like all top companies here today in India, full technology available, infrastructure available, policies are there. Maybe few corrections on GST and 1 or 2 small things are changed, then definitely even IPPs can grow and become much bigger players.
Sambitosh, if I can bring you here, if you can give us a more overarching view, since you see both sides of the business, government as well as many of these corporate houses. Prime Minister has given a great vision that by 2030 he wants to see a 500 gigawatt capacity of renewables, and by 2070 he wants to see a net zero, from the energy side. We all understand that wind comes with a handicap that they achieve peak during the rainy or a monsoon season, or their production goes higher during the evening time and night time. Do you think that without storage, there are some policy plays which can be played? We have seen from 2000 and 2017-18, 2-3 big program came. One came with the accelerated depreciation and then generation-based incentives. Do you think some policy-based incentives can be pushed so that solar acceleration can happen? Maybe some out-of-the-box thinking is required in short term so that, wind can get some leeway, so that whenever storage comes, they have a place.
Sure. So thanks for this, Animesh. But I would start by saying that wind has no handicap. Let me put it very clearly. I think Mr. Tanti rightly mentioned, I think it is perfect for India. The solar plus wind plus storage is an amazing story which India can play. Okay, so that's very clear. Now, where are we on storage? A lot of debate is happening around storage. We are about 100 or 200 megawatt of storage, right? The whole battery systems. Niti Aayog report says we should be at 600 gigawatt hours by 2030. Okay, out of which for 2030 for grid stability we should be around 200 gigawatt hours. Rest are whatever EV mobility, stationary and all. Which means from a 200 megawatt to a 200 gigawatt is 1,000 times jump. Okay. Now that's where we are struggling. And where is China, where is global? I think they are miles ahead, okay, very clear. But the good news is most of the tenders which are coming today are hybrid. Okay. So today somebody can do the mathematics of exactly what Mr. Tanti said. Can I have wind plus solar plus storage? The next 6 years is an amazing story where I think these utilities should be able to do that. That's number one. Number two is there is a long pending policy effort which needs to come in. Okay? And this was a debate which was happening in 2013-14, where we believe that the utilities should be segregated into content and carriage. Okay? Today the utilities have both. Now if you allow content to be contested, then what happens is these IPPs can actually acquire clients, can acquire customers, right? Then the kind of model which is possible is quite different than today they're waiting for these SECI tenders to come in and bidding for it. I allow people to acquire consumers, it's absolutely a different game. Okay? And the third thing very clearly is around wind has an amazing ability. Each wind turbine is what, 3 megawatt? Yeah, 5, 3. So somebody can actually institute a 10 megawatt, 20 megawatt, 25 megawatt. So today when Gujarat says that I will allow feed-in for less than 10 megawatt, it's a great sign, right? Because do understand that wind was having an amazing run till February 2017, I guess, right? When the auctions came in. So I think somewhere we have to stimulate that. So I'm extremely positive that government will have to do the last mile reforms that has been pending for a decade on content carriage. These smaller kind of units have to come in. And the other thing, as you said, corporates, right? This is all effort which is happening at government level. Now look at the SEBI regulations which are coming around, ESG, net zero. Top 1,000 companies have to produce a report around their ambitions. Everybody has a net zero ambition. They've all come out in the last 2 years. They will all have to go in that journey. Now, whether these wind and the solar guys directly interact with these corporates to structure some of these deals will become very interesting space to watch out for.
Great. In fact, we are running out of time. So I think what we could perhaps is ask each of the gentlemen as to maybe 2 or 3 key things that you feel needs to be done to boost investments in the sector, because I think that is where, and what Mr. Mohapatra also highlighted, quickly, if you can come up with, and in case you have anything more, you can interject.
Yeah, so I think, as an industry, if we look, first of all, if you see from the demand side, now demand trajectory is already set by the government, with the bidding calendars which is published, with the India Inc. on an ESG path, which have set out their goals to get, their own net zero targets. I think demand side of renewables is all set. So, good visibility for next decade is there. So, I don't see that there is a challenge from the demand side. Normally, most businesses have that as the major challenge. Now, if you look on the supply side, then on the supply side, there are 2 elements. There is the product element and there is the project element. On the product element, luckily, since, the ecosystem, unlike solar and wind, we have locally made products available. Scaling up there is also not an issue. If we have to hit that 100 gigawatts target by 2030, there is no issue. We have the capacities, we can get there, there is not a problem. I think the only area where we are getting, slowed down is on the execution bit, which is largely the last mile, as my colleague was saying, that basically we need to get that state level infrastructure going to make sure that the projects happen. So, reforms are coming at different states. Some states are a bit faster than the others. But as states add up renewable energy in a big way, then the implementations will kind of smooth out. I think what's important in terms of what more could we do to make most of this advantage for the industry. I think if you see in the last 1 decade, effectively any kind of financial support of any nature that has been given to renewable energy, wind has got zero. Yeah? So there's nothing. It's assumed that you guys can manage your stuff. You don't need anything. And so everything else is just going to solar. And that's why you see the story slightly different. So I think what's important now that, they are at 60, 70 gigawatts. We are at 40, 45 gigawatts on that. There's already that maturity curve for both which has come. So I think the looking forward, what should be important is any kind of new benefits that we give should be more harmonized, because that will allow the ecosystem to develop in a more smoother way. Otherwise, you just kind of give one too much, then you kind of create the imbalance. And with the market moving to an FDRE today, I think it will be a beautiful balance of wind, solar, and storage. And I think that's the way to go, and that is the only way to go to make firm energy.
Okay.
And with that, we will see a very balanced growth.
Mr. Ajay Shankar.
3 quick points. First, I repeat the earlier one that if we stop building new thermal, then this will automatically take off and this is cheaper. The second is state governments should replicate what they did with solar parks, which is aggregating land for individual projects. So wind farm parks in the states which have wind potential, it would be a good idea for the state governments to develop parks so that individual developers can do projects faster. And the third point, and that is an important point, that we need an investor-friendly policy for repowering the existing wind farms where the technology is obsolete. So you can get twice or thrice as much electricity from a good site at a far lower cost. But we are not able to put together a policy which is win-win for the existing investor and the new investor.
Mr. Nithyanand.
I think very quickly, grid, land, regulation, and under grid, we know what we mean. Regulation, I think wind RPOs. But if you ask me, 3 points, land, land, land. And I go back to the point made earlier, everyone struggles in wind. It's the bad cousin, so to speak, that everyone's running away from it because they think, who's going to ever go and build that level of lines? Just to clarify for some of you who don't understand, a solar park requires between 5 to 15 kilometers of line. A wind of the same size requires more than 350 to 400 kilometers of line because each turbine needs connectivity. So land on the ground, support, demarcated land areas, district administration, police needs to be facilitated. But just to step back, I think we all understand this, but just to step back, I just want to bring what I think is where we are at. And I was recently at San Francisco. I met some people from Tesla. And during that conversation, very senior, I just want to bring that perspective, which is very important for wind, which is today, over the last 18 months, battery prices have fallen 50%. Over the last decade, they've fallen 90%. And as we look forward, that will continue its acceleration. Of course, it's led by the EV industry, but the collateral benefit comes to the utility industry. And as it moves, that journey, during that journey, ensuring that you are growing renewables in the right way requires wind with time of day cost to kick in. It requires wind to play the role of transitioning to that journey when eventually it will come to a point that we can really think we can play at, at very, very large scale renewables. I don't think we've got there. I don't think we understand how big this game is as yet. We conceptually do, but I think the time is upon us. And the day that battery cost, as the minister was saying, I think it's much less than what he was mentioning, given that the latest prices have already breached some of those dollar values. The day that happens is when this industry will explode. And it is wind's responsibility because, it's in crude terms, it's energy for breakfast and energy for dinner that matters, not energy for lunch, right? That's the play here. So it's important to play that out in a smart way. And without wind, I can tell you, it'll be a very, very difficult journey.
I also wanted to prick your mind on, we are already talking about one sun, one world, one grid. So do you think offshore wind is an option, when we have to connect India with, say, Middle East, or India with Sri Lanka, or, Norway with England? So do you think, offshore wind now becomes viable?
I used to be on the board of an offshore wind company, and I think offshore wind is a very, very critical part of the entire play. But we must be contextual and very selfish for India. India, offshore wind, very good, proto tests, etc. The first turbines, maybe possibly in the next 2-3 years. But viable deployment, I think, is a little longer than that. We have so much ground to cover on the renewable side in the next 5 years or 6 years that I think we can leave that to the Suzlons. As a developer, I'm leaving it to the Suzlons and some of the other guys to play that out.
Mr. Tanti is more than ready to answer this. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, offshore wind is important. And historically, we've had the opportunity of, owning one of the largest offshore wind companies out of Germany. So there's a good insight into offshore technology and understanding of that. When you look for India-specific offshore situation, I think the things are slightly different for India. Unlike the northern hemisphere, when you see our Indian Ocean, it is reasonably calm ocean. And the winds onshore and offshore in India, you do not get that significant higher winds. The delta which you get in the North Sea or even in the US is significantly higher than what you would get on the Indian Ocean. When you go from onshore to offshore, typically your cost increase happens as a product because of the entire installation in the sea and everything, anywhere from 2.5 to 3x of what you would do a single megawatt here versus there. In the Western world, because of the higher winds in those seas, Pacific Ocean as well as the Atlantic, you are able to get a better wind, and therefore it is becoming affordable as an electricity. In India, because of this disadvantage, your cost will still
Mr. Tanti, I ask you this question, or both of you this question, because now we are talking about HVDC lines, subsea lines. And if we can think of connecting those HVDC lines midway, then many of this cost factor will come down.
I understand, but what I'm just saying is that first I'm just purely talking on technology comparison globally versus India. There the business case is not coming up. That's why you need this value gap funding. So to give you an example, typically today when you are at 3 rupees, 3.5 rupees on land, it's going close to 8 to 9 rupees there as cost of generation. And that's not affordable on that ground. And that's why this, for the proto projects right now, the first gigawatt in Gujarat as well as in Tamil Nadu, we will see it happening. As we get to scale, that will give an advantage, but still you won't be able to bridge that because it's a 3x gap, It's not in percentage, it's in times. So it's a journey for us to get there. And of course, global pricing will also come down by the time. But near term अगर देखते हैं अगले 10 साल का, तो we should not bet on offshore right now.
And the potential on the land mass
So
of
that's
India
the-
is enormous.
So that's the other question.
It's a multiple of what we've done.
Yes.
So we have to first focus on developing the full potential
Okay.
of wind and solar on the land mass of
Let me
India.
just give you the.
So we are
this is a
running
very-
really short of
Yeah,
time.
just 1 minute. So, just to complete the thought, so we can close it. I think a very valid point which Sir touched upon. Just to give you from numbers, the total wind potential of our country and the wind utilization of land today is less than 5%. 95% of the land where we can produce wind energy is still not utilized. And us being so sensitive to the cost of energy, we have to first focus there. So while that's nice to have, this is must to have. So
Yeah.
it's somewhere a decade away.
Mr. Bala, Kutti,
Yeah, but the point,
2 points.
problem in India is, like generations, people feel that land is given by their forefather. They just don't want to give up. So maybe there is potential, but whether there is willingness to give the land to somebody else. So these issues are coming up. Maybe on that angle, offshore will have definitely some scope because it is in the government's hand. And yes, there may be a sea life and other issues to be discussed. But even if 8 rupees, as Tanti says, even if it is the case, today the commercial prices in Bombay are 11, 12 rupees. So what is required is today country is dividing discoms, distribution companies, producer companies, everything, and they are all going to be, on their own. So maybe in 3-5 years time, we could see the demand of power is much higher projected. So I could also see the prices of power will definitely go up. After a long gap, the industry suffered, wind industry, because there were no, prices were only going down tariff. But now the prices are on the up with the demand going up. So I could see there is a case, offshore wind is definitely going to play a bigger role in India.
Okay. Okay, I think we can keep talking about it, but it was a very interesting, session. I thought that we had a big round of applause to all the gentlemen for being on this panel.